So Kirsten is very hard to do an introduction for, which is maybe why I skipped that step. She has accomplished so incredibly much that it makes it difficult to know where to even begin. She's been sailing dinghies since her childhood, but sailing professionally since 2006. From sail training to sailboat deliveries, she built a diverse set of skills and experience. Her longest single-handing passage was a delivery from Portugal to South Africa on an old and maintenance-intensive 32-foot ferro cement sloop with only a wind vane for self-steering. In 2015, she began working for Skip Novak, CCA Great Lakes Station, on his pelagic expeditions to South Georgia, the Antarctic Peninsula, Patagonia, and the Falklands. She has sailed several film crews down to capture the beauty of the Antarctic. She was featured in National Geographic series Wildlife Resurrection Island with Bertie Gregory as she sailed his crew throughout South Georgia and to shed light on the beautiful ecosystems and hardships they've faced. She also sailed and was a support vessel for several crews from the newest BBC series, 7 Worlds, 1 Planet, for footage of leopard seal predation against gentoo penguins and the albatross behavior from Bird Island, South Georgia. Along with sailing, she also enjoys other solitary adventures. She cycled from Europe back home to South Africa on her own when she was 23, more than 9,000 miles over approximately 1 year. The trip brought trials and tribulations, but was a life enriching in every sense. Her next challenge is the Golden Globe Race 2022, a solo, nonstop, unassisted circumnavigation. As many of you know, this retro race is based upon the first solo circumnavigation race that took place in 1968. In order to stay true to the original circumnavigation, boats are all older designs, no bigger than 36 feet, and modern navigational technology like GPS is not permitted. Kirsten will be depending upon her skills in celestial navigation and dead reckoning for an approximate distance of 30,000 nautical miles and anywhere from 7 to 9 months or more at sea. And then I was supposed to say, you can follow her on Facebook and Instagram, but that's the whole preface was what I'd sort of missed. So apologies, Kirsten, that was a big thing to have sort of missed. So now with that introduction, hopefully you're on.
Thank you very much, Dale. And it's a great honor to be here at the CCA meeting and to be able to do a presentation for you. So thank you very much for that. I'll just get into the screen share now. Start my presentation. Right, so Dale's kind of introduced me, but I'll just briefly do it again. So my name's Kirsten Neuschafer, and I have been working on Skip Novak's Pelagic since 2015. I'm the first female entrant for the Golden Globe Race 2022 at this stage. And I'm South African. I live in the Eastern Cape, and I'm 38 years old. Dale did mention it, but just briefly, what is the Golden Globe Race? So it's a retro sailboat race based on the first circumnavigation, non-stop circumnavigation that took place in 1968, approximately 30,000 nautical miles. It's non-stop, it's unassisted. The last winner in the 2018 edition, he did it in 7 months. So that's kind of the minimum that you're looking at. Yeah, no modern navigational equipment. So you're not allowed to have a GPS, which is kind of the really big thing. Also no electronic autopilots. And the boats are of an old school design. So they're long keels, rudders attached to the keel, and they're not allowed to be bigger than 36 foot, which is a relatively small size boat to be in the Southern Ocean. This is the route. So the race starts in France at Les Sables d'Olonne. It goes down the Atlantic, first past Cape Town, then past Australia, Tasmania, past the Cape Horn, and then back up the Atlantic, ending in France where it started non-stop. Other than the photo gate where you come in close shore, You're not to stop, you're not to go alongside, you're not to leave your boat, and you're not to be getting any assistance. That's no water, no food, no tools, no equipment, nothing like that. So yeah, it's obviously a huge undertaking, and the question is really, how do you prepare for a race of that caliber? And for me, honestly, looking back at everything I've done in the years of sailing, it feels like everything I've done has been preparation for this ultimate challenge for me, which that really is what it is. It's an ultimate challenge. So I put this photo in here, or this map. It has nothing to do with sailing, but some people told me I should mention it because it's relevant in some ways. Dale did mention it. When I was 22, I really wanted to explore Africa, and the only way I could do it with what means I had back then was by bicycle. So I bought myself a bicycle, I bought myself some panniers, a whole lot of outdoors equipment, and I started cycling. I started cycling in Germany, and I kept going right up until I got to South Africa in Knysna, where I ended my trip. It was about 15,000 kilometers, and I did it on my own, which basically I think it just points a little bit to my nature in terms of I enjoy adventure. I really, really do. And I do enjoy solitary missions. And it was an absolutely amazing time, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. It was truly, truly life enriching. So that's where I arrived at Cape Agulhas, the southernmost point on my bicycle trip through Africa. And I was standing there at this point looking out to the ocean with supposedly the Atlantic on the one side arbitrarily and the Indian on the other side, and thinking, well, it's been something I've been wanting to do for a long time, and that is sail, explore the oceans. After the trip at the age of 23, when I arrived down there, that's really when I took sailing very seriously and started to make a career of it. But before that, I sort of had a bit of fun on the coastline with the Hobie Cat, and I kind of felt like sailing up to Namibia, up the west coast of Africa, and I was extremely confident, and this is how that ended. In September, still with the pretty big swell coming through, tried to get out over the back line, and the Hobie Cat wrecked, at which point I thought maybe I should go over to slightly bigger sailboats. So I did. I started running the sailing school in East London, South Africa, for a while, and then I went over to doing coastal deliveries and had a fantastic time. We'd stop all along the coast, waiting for the right weather windows, going surfing, all that sort of thing. From there, I kind of made contacts with people that at the time were delivering leopard catamarans that are built in Cape Town and then get exported. And at the time, they were using delivery crews to bring the catamarans to their new owners. And I spent many years, about 12 years, in fact, mainly delivering these leopard catamarans. There's an example of a leopard 44, but we used to deliver anything from 38 foot up to 54 foot. And these were boats that were fresh out of the factory, so you had to get them in showboat condition to the other side of the ocean. Now, any of the boats that were going to Australia or New Zealand, they used to have to go across the whole Atlantic and through the Panama Canal and then across the Pacific, because they didn't want these brand new catamarans going into the Southern Ocean, because they were worried that there'd be too much damage. So that was the route that we used to take. It was a great experience. And then I had a lucky break doing this delivery on this boat called my yacht, which was a ferrocement boat. It was built by the owner himself. The owner was a friend of mine in East London, and he had actually sailed the boat to Portugal with his family, left it there, come back to South Africa, and got back into the rat race, and he didn't have time to carry on sailing the boat. So he said to me, "Kirsten, would you bring this boat back to South Africa for me?" And I said, "Sure, I would gladly do so, but I would like to do it single-handed." And he said, "You can do whatever you like." He said, "The boat's name is my yacht, but it'll be your yacht, and you take your time and just get it back to me in one piece." And it was a really amazing experience, because the boat had been neglected quite a bit, and it had an old engine from the 70s off an old fishing boat with a 2-cylinder massive flywheel. and the engine didn't really work. The sails were pretty shot because he hadn't taken them down before he left Portugal. So they were tearing on me the whole time. And I had lots of sort of things to repair and maintain throughout that whole journey. So it was extremely good experience. It was also the first time I got down into the Southern Ocean, the Southern Atlantic. That was the route I took. So starting in the south of Portugal, I stopped off in various places because he wasn't in a hurry for his boat. So I did do a little bit of exploring. But then the final leg was from Rio de Janeiro across back to South Africa, taking me across the Southern Atlantic. And I was at that stage very keen to get to explore the Southern Ocean. So it was an amazing trip. That particular leg took me 67 days just because it was a slow boat. And I had to rely solely on the wind. Yeah, so that was my introduction into the Southern Atlantic. And then I really felt like exploring more of the Southern Ocean. And there, that's just a picture of me down there on the Southern Ocean on my yacht. There I got a lucky break because the catamaran delivery company contacted me and said, we've got a catamaran that urgently needs to get to the Sydney boat show. There's not enough time to take it across the whole of the Atlantic and through the Panama Canal and across the Pacific. So would you be willing to take this boat across the Southern Indian Ocean? And I said, yes, I would, because I've been waiting for this trip for a long time. So here's the Southern Indian Ocean with this island called St. Paul. It's a French island. They do crayfish or southern lobster fishing down there. And what it is, it's a crater with a wall that has collapsed and allowed for the sea to flow into the crater. And so here we came along. It was kind of stormy outside of the crater, and we thought, well, this is an opportunity to explore. So we sailed in, and you can see it's kind of a very narrow entrance over here. And you'd think that it would be beautifully calm inside of the crater, but actually it's a very treacherous place because the sea floor drops off really quickly there from the shore down to about 250 to 300 meters. So you have to get really close to the shore to be able to anchor. And because of these steep crater walls, you've got winds swirling around all the time, some gusts gusting up to 40, 50, and it turned out to be quite a treacherous place. So we constantly had someone on board. Obviously in this photo, one of us had actually swum ashore because we didn't have any dinghies, walked to the top of the crater and taken this photo. It's uninhabited. But it became so unbearable that we landed up leaving the crater in the middle of the night, and it was quite a spectacular sort of departure because I remember we had a big strong flashlight and we were shining it to try and find, be sure that we had the crater exit, and there were hundreds of these sub-Antarctic fur seals sitting here on the spit, and all of their eyes were glowing. And it was kind of a very eerie departure, and we felt really happy to be back into the safety of the deep oceans. But it was a very interesting place to go and look at, and it really made me grateful for my job because it's a kind of place you can really only get to by boat. And it certainly made me want to see more of these sub-Antarctic islands and more of the Southern Ocean. So the next step for me was, and it was something that I'd wanted to do for a long time, was to be able to work on one of Skip Novak's boats, because of course I knew about him and I knew about places that his boats went to, and I was dying to get onto one of his boats. So I got a lucky break and met one of his skippers who took me along as crew. That was back in 2015. And yeah, and I really, really enjoyed it. I got totally hooked, and it was such a privilege working for Skip Novak. So I'd just like to tell you a little bit about his boats and about the places that I have had the privilege to go to in the years that I've been working for Skip. So this boat here is Pelagic, which is the original Pelagic, which he built back in the 80s. It's a 54-foot, a custom-built steel sloop. Steel, obviously, because it's strong material, hull material, for the types of places that Pelagic goes to, where you're often dealing with ice. And the special features about Pelagic are its lifting rudder, lifting keel. It's a super strong boat. It's got a really strong rig, and it's really built for heavy weather, for high latitudes, and for getting into these icy sort of areas. And then I also did a season on Pelagic Australis, which is a boat that Skip built in 2004. And it's a bigger kind of version of Pelagic, except that it's an aluminum boat at 74 foot, but it's got the same principle of lifting rudder, lifting keel, and really custom built for these kind of expeditions. So here is a photo of Pelagic in the Falkland Islands, and we've actually dried her out here where the tide's gone really low on a spring tide. And this is one of the great features about this boat, is in this photo the keel is right up, which allows you to dry the boat out without it standing on its keel. And you can also see here that the rudder has been lifted. And this is a really good thing for, you know, going into places where you don't have the infrastructure to haul a boat as you would normally, because if you can dry the boat out like this, you can careen the hull, you can even put a bit more anti-fouling onto it if you need to. You could change the prop, you can do a lot of underwater work as long as you do it within, you know, the time that you have while the tide is out. And that's a really really great feature, because if you did, for example, hit a piece of ice or something and needed to change your propeller, and you could find a sheltered bay where you could dry the boat out, then that is what you could do. Yeah, here's just a photo of Pelagic from a loft, and here on this photo you'll see these 4 spools of line over here. Now each of those spools has about 100 meters of line, which is a great feature, because in this photo here you can see the spools. We would in many instances go into very narrow bays where you don't have enough swing room to swing around on your anchor, and you can actually take these lines out, 2 out on the bow, 2 out on the stern, and tie yourself in onto rocks, onto trees, even onto ice with ice screws if need be. So that's just another feature. And here in this photo, this is actually a photo of South Georgia, and you can see Pelagics come into quite a narrow bay here, quite a shallow bay. You can see the rocks and the reefs, and we had to lift the keel and the rudder just to even get in here. And then once we got in here, because it's so narrow, the first thing we did, you can just discern, is take the lines out, the shore lines, after dropping the anchor. So that's great. Then you can be in a place like South Georgia where you've got katabatic winds coming off the ice sheets and swirling around, and still sit pretty safely there. Yeah, so that's kind of what we do for pelagic expeditions. The areas we've been exploring: Falklands, Patagonia, South Georgia, and the Antarctic Peninsula. And then there's always been a sort of transatlantic crossing, Southern Ocean, for people who wanted to experience a little bit of heavy weather. Pelagic Australis, the bigger boat, has also been up to Greenland, and we've recently, since 2018, we've come up to the north with Pelagic with the intention of going to Greenland and Baffin Island at some point, and we've already had the joy of exploring Newfoundland. So really some great places that you get to go to. So back to the southern trips that we would do. On Pelagic, most of our charters were based out of the Falkland Islands, because it's one of the places that you can actually access and fly into with a commercial airline. And then they'd have one, and maybe at this stage they've got 2 flights a week. But yeah, from there you can obviously sail over to South Georgia, so it's kind of the closest place with a commercial landing strip to South Georgia. So just a little bit about the Falkland Islands. 2 main islands with 770 plus smaller islands surrounding it. Only 3,200 people, of which most of them live in Port Stanley, which is on the east of the island, and then almost 500,000 sheep. So there are massive sheep farms out there. That is a photo of the church in Port Stanley with a whalebone memorial just in front of the church. And this is a photo of Pelagic in one of the bays of one of the islands there. It's there's lots of little inlets, and there's beautiful exploring that you can do on the Falkland Islands. And interestingly, the Falkland Islands, however many hundreds of millions of years ago, broke off the African continent, off the southern African part. And the landscape down there is kind of similar to some of the landscape you find in South Africa, with these low-lying sort of mountains, not very tall mountains, and low-lying landscape. And geologically it looks quite similar, and then the vegetation also looks similar to some of the areas in the Karoo. In the Karoo, it's because it's dry there and it's sort of semi-desert, but here on the Falklands, this very low-lying vegetation you see is because it's really windy on the Falklands, so trees don't really manage to get very big, and this is the vegetation that thrives, and it's pretty good for having sheep, so they survive really well with that kind of vegetation. And this is a typical farm on the Falkland Islands. That would be the farmhouse. Very small settlement. The people living there are extremely isolated because you don't have roads actually going out to those farms. So this is their mode of transport. They have these islander airplanes that fly them out to the settlement. And yeah, and otherwise the Falkland Islands is really a beautiful spot because there's a lot of wildlife. Here you can see the upland geese. This is a Johnny Rook, which is a bird of prey, a caracara, and they have no fear of humans either. They kind of walk behind you in some areas, maybe hoping that you'd fall over and they can come and pick out your eyes. They're pretty robust birds of prey. That's also a Johnny Rook. They're beautiful albatross colonies, and you can get right up close and personal to these animals. This is a black-browed albatross colony. In and amongst them is also the rock penguins. You can see the albatross and penguin nest sites there. That's just a better photo of the rock hopper penguins. And this is on the Jason Islands, more albatross colonies, and none of these animals are scared of humans, so you can really get very close to them and see them on land, in the water, on the air. Really amazing. And then there are quite a few sea lions down in the Falklands. And every now and again, it happens that you need to get into the water to go and change a zinc or just for a general hull inspection. The water's pretty cold down there, so you want to be well kitted out in a dry suit. And then the sea lions can get pretty curious. They're actually very friendly in the water. They're less friendly outside of the water because I guess they feel more threatened when they're outside of the water. But yeah, when you're in the water with them, they come right up to you. And there's dolphins. This is a Peel's dolphin over here. That one too. Then there are these little Commerson's dolphins that they call puffing pigs down in the Falklands, and they come in huge swarms and surround the boat often, which is a lovely sight to see. And yeah, and there are all sorts of wrecks in the Falklands. Diving down in the Falklands is even a great thing to do. So it's actually a really great place to explore. And as I was mentioning, it's kind of the closest point to South Georgia to sail from. So South Georgia is roughly about 800 nautical miles from the Falklands. And when you're sailing down to South Georgia from the Falklands, you've got the wind and the currents, everything in your favor. So on pelagic, you could do it in 5 days, but then when you're sailing back from South Georgia, you're sailing against the elements. So then it might often take you 7 or 8 even days to get back to the Falklands. So just a little bit on South Georgia. South Georgia, as opposed to the Falklands, however many millions of years ago, broke off the South American continent. So the landscape on South Georgia is very different to the Falklands. It's really more like that rugged, mountainous landscape that you find in South America, like an extension of the Andes. And it's quite heavily glaciated with the ice cap. There's no permanent settlement on South Georgia as there is in the Falklands. There's no landing strip for fixed wing aircraft. So at best, there might at times be helicopters there if they've come in on one of the Navy ships, but otherwise there's no aircraft there. And then there are 2 British Antarctic Survey scientific stations down there. And there's a little museum in summer that's open for the cruise ship tourists, because that's really their main industry on South Georgia is the cruise ship tourism. And then much bigger industry still is the toothfish industry. And South Georgia claims that they've got a totally sustainable toothfish industry. And with the money they make off the toothfishing, they can actually preserve South Georgia and try and undo some of the damage that was done to South Georgia over since the early 1900s. So yeah, so that's South Georgia. So now this is Groot Beacon. It's an old whaling station. That's really what put South Georgia on the map, was the fact that they did so much whaling down there. This is just Pelagic australis together with Golden Fleece at Groot Beacon. It's also the only whaling station that you can actually explore, because they've sanitized it and they've made it safe for people to walk around. So yeah, as I was mentioning, the whaling really put South Georgia on the map. So from 1904 up until 1965, they killed 175,250 whales. And they would slaughter them right there in the bays, like here in the bay where Groot Beacon is. This is an old whaling boat wreck. It's right there in Groot Beacon. You can still see the harpoon gun on the bow and the crow's nest, everything for the whale watchers to spot the whales. So it's kind of really fascinating place, but also a little bit macabre, because when you read the reports of how many whale carcasses were floating around that bay at the peak of the whaling season. Here you can see the old blubber pots, and in the background there is an old Norwegian church which they've restored because it was a Norwegian whaling station. Yeah, and another point of interest in Groot Beacon is that Ernest Shackleton is buried there. Even after his ordeal of making his way across from Elephant Island to South Georgia, he kept on coming back, and that's actually where he died. And is buried there today. But of course, lots of people died down there. Living down there as a whaler back in the day would have been a pretty harsh thing to have to do. In the background, on the left here of this photo, you can see the fishery patrol ship, and they do a very good job of patrolling the area and making sure that there's no illegal fishing happening in their waters. Now, this is a photo of what was once the biggest whaling station. This is Leith Harbour, and this was a Scottish whaling station. And in this photo, it actually looks quite charming because it's early morning and the moon is just setting and there's still snow on the mountains. But if you come closer and you look at this whaling station on a different day, you can really see that it's a totally derelict ghost town of what once was a very well organized whale killing and processing station. And Leith Harbour and all the other whaling stations, you're not allowed to access, not allowed to approach, neither by land nor by sea, by more than 200 meters, because you can see there's a lot of sheet metal lying around here, and there's asbestos and a lot of wreckage. And because of the mountains and the ice caps and everything, you get some serious winds coming down the mountain slopes. So for example, in this photo, you can see Pelagic australis at anchor. That's probably in 70 knots of wind. You can see the person on the bows checking that the anchor isn't dragging. Now, if you were in these conditions anywhere close to a place like this, you can imagine the amount of sheet metal and stuff that would be flying around. But also they're trying to preserve these, and they don't really want people going into those whaling stations and looting them and taking back souvenirs and stuff out of the stations. So yeah, very interesting. So South Georgia was first discovered by Captain Cook in 1788. Captain Cook was actually looking for the Great White Continent, being Antarctica. And once he got around the last cape, and he knew that it was an island and it wasn't a continent, and he was completely disappointed because he was trying to find Antarctica. So he called that cape, that final cape, he called it Cape Disappointment. But when he got back and he described South Georgia, he described there being hundreds and thousands of fur seals and elephant seals. And of course, once people heard about this, the sealers started arriving en masse. And in this photo, you can see very old tripods. They used to actually boil down and render the fat out of the elephant seals in the tripods. But the seal standing behind this tripod is not an elephant seal, it's a fur seal, it's a male fur seal, sub-Antarctic fur seal. And now the fur seals were also sought after. So at the start of the 20th century, they had been so hunted for their pelts that there were only a few hundred left, and then they banned the hunting of fur seals. And since then, they have recovered in the most remarkable way, to the point that there are now estimated 5 million fur seals. And when you go to South Georgia, they are just everywhere. And now in this photo, you can see the male on the right. with his harem of females and a few pups. And it gets quite difficult moving around when it's the mating season, because each male has its territory, and they're very defensive. And if you walk into their territory, they mock attack you. And obviously, you don't want to get bitten by them, because that could be pretty painful. But yeah, these animals have no evolutionary fear of humans. So in this photo, you can see someone was sitting here, probably myself, sitting dead still, and this little seal pup came right up to the camera's lens. And especially the pups, they're not scared at all. They're just super curious. In this photo as well, you're not allowed approaching the animals, but if you sit down and you don't move, they come right up to you. And this is exactly what these little fur seal pups were doing here. And here's also a blonde fur seal pup. 1 in 800 is a blonde fur seal pup. So it's a really amazing experience to go down there, because you get to be so close to these animals that don't fear you. This is a photo of the scientific station, the Bass Scientific Station on Bird Island. Very special on these pelagic trips that we get to go to places like Bird Island, because you're otherwise not allowed to go there. It's strictly for scientists. So the permitting is pretty difficult to get there. And yeah, and on the inside of this door, there's actually a signboard saying, watch out, fur seal pups, because they lie on the porch all day long, and you walk out from inside and they're usually right behind the door. Now, these are the elephant seals that were hunted for their blubber, and this is a male seal right here. They're really interesting animals. The males weigh a few tons. The females don't get that big. They only weigh, around roughly 800 kilograms. And they've actually been able to measure that these seals dive down to depths of 2,500 meters and go hunting and eat whatever it is they eat down there. But they come to South Georgia to breed and mate. That's just a photo of one in the water. That's a male fur seal. Here you can see there's quite a big size difference between the seals. That's the male that weighs a few tons, and then the much smaller female. And these are the pups. Now, the pups, they get nursed by their mothers for about 2 or 3 weeks, and then the mothers leave them to their own device. So they often lie together, because the 3 weeks to be out alone in the big wide world is probably quite a daunting thing. That's just another photo of a male with a few king penguins in the background. And this is a photo of a near newborn fur seal pup. They're born these little dark colored, almost kind of loose skinned little pups, and they fall out into those fat little sausages that get abandoned by their mothers quite quickly. And it's quite a raw and brutal place, because it's survival of the fittest down there. And here's a photo of a giant petrel, an amazing bird of prey also, that's obviously picked one of the much weaker fur seal pups. And you get to see it all in its rawest down on South Georgia. And that's just a giant petrel again, taking off the water. And this is a skua. They're also pretty amazing predatory birds. Also no fear, but they do prey on penguin chicks, on seal pups, all that sort of thing. Now to the penguins, they're amazing penguin colonies down in South Georgia. They were also once boiled up for their fat. Doesn't happen anymore. This is a king penguin. Here are the king penguins in the water, going out hunting or fishing so that they can feed their young. The king penguins, they breed all year round, so you can always find chicks any time of year you go to South Georgia. This is what the chicks look like before they get the adult plumage. And they all group together in these big nurseries, and you always get a few adults that stay behind while the others are out fishing, because obviously the skuas and the giant petrels are really eager to make a meal out of them. And this place is very special. This is St. Andrews Bay in South Georgia, where there's a colony of 300,000 birds. So when you go there, it's an absolutely amazing sight and smell, mind you, but it's really amazing to see a colony that big. And then there are also other penguins and bird species down on South Georgia. The diversity and the amount that you find them in is absolutely amazing. But these are the macaroni penguins. And these, for example, are the wandering albatross. They're the biggest of the albatross. And in this photo, this is on Bird Island, where we were accompanied by scientists. they're doing their mating dance. And here you can see wildlife filmmaker Bertie Gregory right up close and personal with one of these wandering albatross. And that's also Bertie filming at St. Andrews. Just an interesting photo. The next one, because here you can see one of the elephant seal pups has come right in to inspect his tripod and camera. So there's absolutely no fear there. And this was another type of trip that we do on pelagic, and that we did do. This was accompanying 4 kayakers that wanted to kayak South Georgia. That's actually where Molly and I met. And yeah, that was a really special trip because we got permission to go right around the island, and also to go and anchor in certain anchorages and go ashore in places that you usually wouldn't be allowed to go. But the nice thing was that these guys, they were actually fully kitted out to camp on shore, and they didn't really need us, but they did need us for permitting reasons. So we never had any clients on board, so we could sit and enjoy ourselves on that trip. That's just a photo of the 4 of them. And yeah, I mean, they got to see some amazing scenery and kayak in some really amazing places. A pretty rough trip because obviously South Georgia is pretty windy and there's ice and the water is really cold. So yeah, and this is sort of how we provision the boat, because we provision the boat in the Falkland Islands where there are almost 500,000 sheep, so it's easy to get good mutton. And then what we do is we just hang a full sort of carcass like that off the gantry, and then sail across to South Georgia, in which time the meat gets nice and salt cured, and it doesn't, because it's too cold down there. And then when you want to make a nice leg of lamb roast, you just go and hack a leg off with a wood saw, pop it in the oven, and then you can feed your crew and your clients. This is a photo of pelagic, of the interior of pelagic, everyone waiting for that leg of lamb to come out of the oven. Yeah, and then obviously there aren't docks and marinas all over in South Georgia, so you've got to drop anchor and then get ashore with the dinghy. Some of the shore landings end up being pretty rough. You're not always guaranteed to get ashore dry. And then the other thing that we would always do when we landed a group in South Georgia was that we'd send them with a shore barrel. Here you can see the shore barrel, and the shore barrel has basic emergency stuff in it. So it would have a VHF radio, and it was have a tent and a little cooker with fuel and some tea and some emergency food. And just so that if we landed a group and the crew that stays back and watches the boat at anchor suddenly has to move out of an anchorage, which could quite easily happen because the winds might become too high that you can safely still stay in a particular anchorage, or you might have ice drifting in or something like that. So you've got to be prepared for the fact that you might have to move off and you might not be able to come back for a couple of days, in which time the shore team needs to be able to sustain themselves. Yeah, another type of expedition we do with pelagic would be these mountaineering expeditions, where you get people that would want to do first ascents, and Skip Novak would usually join them on those expeditions. They come all kitted out for glacier travel and with their pulks and all their tents and all their gear, and off they go, all tied up together so that if anyone falls into a crevasse, they can be rescued by the others. And then we'd be in contact with them each day via satellite phone and, ask them how they are. And sometimes you'd say that, they'd say they're still sitting in exactly the same place for 3 days, waiting out weather like this, where they're in a total whiteout, where they wouldn't be able to make any progress in 50 knots of wind, and just having to dig their tents out of the spindrift the whole time, and build themselves these kind of shelters. But then when the wind and the weather would finally clear, then they'd keep on going to do their first ascents, climb these amazingly steep peaks, all this ice climbing and stuff like that, get to the top, take the photo, be able to name the peak perhaps because it might have been a first ascent, and then they would come down again, and usually we drop them off at the south of South Georgia, and then we pick them up at the north, so they'd actually do substantial ice sheet crossing as well, and always come back with beautiful photos to show us. Yeah, and then South Georgia has a lot of icebergs around it, and I kind of seem to think that since 2015 I've noticed more and more icebergs each time we've gone there, but I guess it depends from season to season. Really beautiful things to see. Of course, you need to be pretty careful about how close you get to them in case they flip, and they're often grounded. And with a swell action, it's quite easy for them to flip. In this particular photo, there's a leopard seal lying around on one of the icebergs. This is a particularly big iceberg. The icebergs, if they're floating, they will only show about 10% of their volume. So the majority of the icebergs are below water. So you can imagine with an iceberg that's sticking out that high, that there's a massive chunk of ice below it. Of course, this one's grounded, so it's probably sticking out a little bit higher than just 10% of its volume. But yeah, really, really spectacular stuff to see. It does obviously pose a navigational hazard. You know, when we're sailing and when we're underway, you can see a big berg on a radar, but the danger is the growlers, the smaller pieces that you can't pick up on the radar. And then you'd often want to reduce sail quite substantially, so that if you did suddenly see a berg or a growler or a bergy, but that you'd be able to maneuver around it quite quickly. Yeah, so that's to South Georgia. Then the other place we used to do a little bit of exploring around and do charters to was Patagonia and Cape Horn. That doesn't really happen that much nowadays because you're not allowed to do commercial charters down there anymore. But really beautiful place to go to. This is the southernmost yacht club, the McKelvey in Puerto Williams in Chile on the Beagle Channel. And this is kind of the scenery you get down there. It's, you know, beautiful mountains and then forested, the southern beach forests. And here's a photo of Pelagic in a really small bay where once again, we've used the shorelines to tie up onto trees so that you can actually be in that tiny little bay, because you get a lot of wind in the Beagle Channel, and sometimes you can just be, you know, a few meters out of the main channel in a little cove like that, and you will be completely out of the wind, while looking out there'll still be 40 knots deeper into the channel. So a really special, really beautiful place, and some of the most amazing sunsets I've ever seen down there. And then yeah, towards sort of the end of the season, when it's turning into the southern fall or autumn, those smaller bays start freezing over, and you've got beautiful glaciers and absolutely beautiful landscape to explore. Now, this photo is a photo of Pelagic in Ushuaia, which is the southernmost city, and that's on the Argentine side of the Beagle Channel. And what we'd often do there is we provision the boats in Ushuaia to leave for the Antarctic Peninsula. So yeah, we'd leave from the south of South America here across the Drake Passage, and the Drake can be quite a treacherous passage because you've got all the weather systems coming across the whole of the Southern Pacific Ocean, and they're kind of getting funneled between this little section over here. So you always want to choose your weather at a good time so that you can get across safely. And then once you get across the Drake and you get down to the peninsula, you get into what we'd often call the banana belt, because you're more into the polar highs there, and you can have just days and days of absolutely beautiful weather, glassy, calm water, as you can see in this photo. And then the peninsula is really, really beautiful, but it's heavily glaciated. So there aren't that many places where you can go ashore unless you're rigged for glacier travel and skiing and that type of thing. But you can enjoy the beauty of the peninsula largely just from the boats and all these icebergs and things that you can see. And you can't, unfortunately, always get through all the channels you'd like to, because often it's really choked up with ice. And this would be sort of a typical kind of scene where we're trying to weave our way through ice. And this ice here is not very compact, so it's quite easy to motor through. And when you're motoring through it forwards, you're usually okay, as long as you're not going too fast and you're not hitting chunks that are too big. But the danger comes if you've come to a bit of an impasse and you have to turn around and go back, which you can't always foresee ahead of time. Because if you're going astern on your motor, that's when the prop likes to suck the ice in, and all you need is for a little ice to hit to nick the prop, and it could slightly warp the prop, which would give it really bad vibration. So those are kind of the things that you tend to have to look out when you're down there. So what we do a lot there, and Pelagic, Australis and Pelagic, they both have mast steps going up to the first set of spreaders, so that you can quickly send someone up the first set of spreaders to try and find a lead through the ice and guide the helmsman down below to where they possibly would find the least compact ice. And now here's a photo of pelagic australis. This photo was taken by a drone, and drones incidentally have become super useful for trying to find a lead through the ice. But you can see that, you know, where we've come from behind us, there wasn't that much ice, but we're going into thicker and thicker ice and bigger chunks of ice, and you can't get past these chunks, and you come to a point where you can't really push and displace the ice anymore to get it out of your way. So you never really always know how far you're going to get down there, but really amazing type of exploring to do. And then there are some areas where there's rock and land and where you can actually go ashore, and down there are also pretty amazing colonies of birds. This is a Gentoo colony, and that's pelagic australis in a relatively narrow little bay. And then there are a whole lot of stations down there. They're usually you know, government stations belonging to countries. This is a Chilean station, usually scientific. And they're very welcoming. Most of them are very welcoming if you swing in for a cup of tea, because I guess if they spend all season there, they're happy for new company and new faces. And yep, that's another Gentoo colony, and you can get pretty close to them. And that's just a really young little hatchling. And then this is an emperor penguin, really special. You don't see them often on the peninsula, but sometimes they come over from East Antarctica. And this was a really special day, actually. We came alongside an ice, sort of, this isn't ice, this is just ice that had frozen over the last winter, but it was really thick, so we could come alongside and you could easily walk on it. As you can see, someone's walked the anchor out over here, and the emperor came in really close to come and see us. And here someone was sitting up on the spreaders, just taking a photo of this from aloft. And you can actually see here on the port side of the boat just how thick that ice is, just from 1 year's winter freezing. And the interesting thing here is that as the seawater freezes, it actually pushes the salt out of it, so that the ice doesn't really have that much salt in it. But a result of that is that the water below the ice is super salty. It's a really salty brine, and it doesn't freeze anymore at the normal freezing point. So this water here is actually below freezing. So it's not the kind of water you want to go and have a polar swim in. But yeah, that's pretty interesting. And other wildlife like the crab eater seals, and these were Ross seals, a really special day that was. But just to give you an idea of the landscape. And this is another photo of pelagic australis in what you can see is a very narrow little bay. Once again, we've got the shorelines out here to keep the boat from swinging around on its anchor. And when you look beyond in this photo, you can see this incredible maze of bergs, and that took some really like 10 hours of really concentrated helming through that kind of ice landscape. Absolutely beautiful though, and you can see what places you get to eventually from something like that. Yeah, and eventually it just gets too cold to be down there, at which point pelagic australis would go back to Cape Town for a decent refit and to prepare for the next season. So yeah, that's been life on the pelagics, and it's been really an amazing experience. And the thing you kind of ask yourself after that is, well, what's next? Because that's really amazing. How do you top it? And for me, I guess at this stage, very much so, it is to do the Golden Globe race, which a lot of people call the ultimate challenge for a sailor, but I guess that's a matter of opinion. That was just a quote from Sir Robin Knox Johnston back in 1968, when he was preparing for the Golden Globe race. It's a challenge that's been created to achieve that dream. So it's something that I'd like to do now. Yeah, and as for the Golden Globe race, because it's a retro race and because you don't have modern weather forecasting, and you're relying on a sextant to navigate and all that sort of thing, and you're in a 36-foot boat on the Southern Ocean, it's not just about how good a sailor you are, but it's also about enduring over that amount of time. It's about your seamanship and not letting the boat break, for example, because a broken boat's not necessarily going to get you over the finish line either. It is a race of attrition because inevitably some competitors are going to fall out of the race before getting to the finish line. And there's a huge element of luck in this race, and all those aspects of the race really fascinate me and intrigue me, and that's really why I'd like to do this race. Apart from that, I really like the single-handed aspect of it too. So just a little bit to how do you actually into the race? Well, you need an invitation, and then you need to get a boat once you've become a competitor. And just briefly to touch on the features of the boat again, the boats need to have been designed prior to 1988. That doesn't necessarily mean built prior to 1988, but designed before that, so that the designs kind of fit the era of 1968. And because they don't want people to have unfair advantages in this race, they put in this rule that they have to have built a minimum of 20 boats from one mold, which puts them in production category rather than custom category. They need to be fiberglass for the Suhaili category that I'll be sailing in, and they're not allowed to be bigger than 36 foot. They need to have full-length keels with a rudder attached to the keel, and yep, the minimum displacement is 6,200 kilograms. And so I did quite a lot of research with the help of Mike Coolidge and various other people, a lot of other people that advised me and helped me, into which would be the best of the permitted designs that tick all the boxes for those requirements. And after a lot of looking and reading and looking at boats and sailing boats and all that, we came up with this Cape George 36 that did tick all the boxes. And why did I essentially choose this boat? Well, it's really long on the waterline. It's longer than any of the other designs. And it has a reputation for being a very seaworthy blue water vessel that tracks extremely well, which is really beneficial in this race, because your only self-steering is the wind vane, and if your boat doesn't track well and your wind vane really has to work hard to keep you on track, well, you might eventually have damage or wear to your wind vane, which is incidentally one of the reasons why some of the competitors in 2018 quit the race. Yeah, and it is quite a heavy displacement boat as well. It's if you look at the specs compared to some of the other boats, it's much heavier. But I, you know, having spent all these years on the pelagics, I like a heavy displacement boat. And especially considering that 2/3 of this race is down in the Southern Ocean, I feel that I'd be a lot more comfortable and feel a lot safer on a heavy displacement boat. And it has quite a big rig and a substantial sail area to make up for that heavy displacement. So this is the boat that I've chosen, and I really do believe that it's a good boat, and I'm thrilled to have been able to get a Cape George 36, because at the time when I started to look for one, there were only 3 on the market, and I chose this boat Minnehaha, which I bought up in Newfoundland. I bought it at the beginning of 2019. And then I came to Maine to carry on working on pelagic. And then, of course, the pandemic happened. And I pretty much tried all of 2020 to get to, I bought it at the beginning of 2020 to get to the boat in Newfoundland, but I couldn't because of border closures. And I kept on begging the authorities in Newfoundland to let me in. And eventually they said, okay, you can come. And then I still needed to find a reason to actually come into Canada. So I had to register the boat as a commercial vessel, which allowed me to come in as crew of a commercial vessel. And that was late November, really going into winter in Newfoundland, but I was exceptionally happy to get there. And the boat was at the time standing in Fortune Harbour. So this is a photo of the boat in Fortune, me doing my rig check and taking a photo from aloft. And this is a photo of Minnehaha taken by a very kind man called John Mersden, who saw Minnehaha coming into the port of Burgeo. And he shouted down to me from his balcony and he said, the channel is deep enough for you to get into port. So I proceeded, and not a few minutes after getting through the channel, I had engine failure. And it wasn't a major thing, but it was enough to stop the engine. What had happened is the exhaust muffler had split, and the exhaust had spewed all the fumes and water into the engine compartment, which had created fumes and steam, which had suffocated the engine, and the engine would not start again. And this kind gentleman came down to the dock and he helped me come alongside, which I was extremely happy for. And shortly after that, I met Joe Hiscock, who might be here at the meeting this evening, who was an incredible help to me. It was absolutely amazing being in Newfoundland in those various little ports. I might mention here that Minnehaha, my boat, my Cape George 36, had been standing on the hard for 4 years by the time I got to sail her. So I did have a whole lot of little problems that I had to iron out, but they were all minor things like the muffler cracking and, you know, a few plumbing problems and stuff like that. But then in between, you know, sorting out little problems in port and waiting for the right kind of weather, because it was wintry and there were times when the rig was icing up or when there were sort of winter storms sweeping past the coastline. But when I did get to sail, I got to sail Minnehaha, and I got to sail her in good conditions, 35 knots of breeze, slightly over canvas, because at this stage she only has hank on sails. And I was absolutely amazed at the speed that I got it out of her, 8 to 9 knots, which is more than her hull speed. And admittedly, I probably had some beneficial current, but the boat felt stable, it felt solid, it felt fast, and it held its course amazingly well. So I was actually, I was surprised by just how well she was performing. It was more than I had expected. So I was really, really happy. And then, well, I landed up being in Newfoundland for a good 6, maybe more weeks, waiting for a gap to get across the Cabot Strait, because the problem with the Cabot is there's quite a lot of currents in the Cabot, and then with those winter storms, it was getting really, really churned up. That was the one problem. But the other problem was that it was getting so cold that the rig was icing up, and I didn't want to go across and have icing happening and then, you know, lose stability with the rig getting heavier and heavier as it would have been accumulating ice. But eventually I did get a gap to get across, and I got across the Cabot Strait, and I made way straight for Prince Edward Island, Summerside, where Alan Burland had extremely kindly arranged everything for me, accommodation, which he has offered me a car to drive, and he arranged all the logistics around hauling the boat there, which was absolutely amazing, because I got into Summerside just in time before it really started icing up to the point that I wouldn't have been able to come alongside anymore. And yeah, here's just a photo to show you the icing conditions that I was experiencing on the rig. And then we hauled the boat. Some amazing, brilliant innovation here, where we have got a whole lot of hay bales to actually transport the mast on an ordinary trailer. We hauled the boat with a crane, transported her with a trailer that's otherwise used for lobster boats, which was quite unconventional, but went really, really well, predominantly thanks to Eddie Arsenault. And we got her into this shed here, which is great. It's a heated shed, it's got a compressor, it's full of tools, and we're working full steam ahead now on the refit. We've stripped all the teak off the decks, we've rebuilt the bulwarks, we've taken the gudgeons out, put new rudder pins, and the work is just really, really working, moving really swiftly. And it's between Eddie and myself doing this work, where Eddie is the mastermind of executing the jobs that need to be done. And without him, I'd be pretty lost. It's amazing to have him working on the refit, and we're making such amazing progress. I could not wish to be in a better spot right now, to be quite honest. So just briefly to touch on the Golden Globe 2018. In 2018, there were 18 competitors, of which only 5 made the finish line. And why? Well, because there was quite a bit of breakage happening. As I mentioned, you know, wind vane self-steering gear was failing. Capsizings were happening. Of course, the inevitable happens after capsizing, that is a dismasting. And there were even the winner capsized, but he pitch poled, but he was lucky enough not to lose his rig, so he went on to actually getting to the finish line and getting over it first. Yeah, and various different things. People were running out of water and all sorts of things. The first, second, and third in 2018 were all Rustler 36s. There were 6 Rustlers, of which 3 capsized and 3 didn't. And yep, those were sort of the rankings. So I'm hoping that the Cape George will be a good competitor to the Rustler. Yep, and so that's to the Golden Globe 2018. Now I'm in the middle of my campaign, trying to get to the start line here, and obviously I'm not going to get there on my own. I've already had so much help, so much advice, so much support, financial support, gear, all sorts of things without which I'd never even be near to where I am right now. But there's still quite a long way to go, and the race starts in September of 2022. So that leaves me just with over a year, and time is ticking quickly. So yeah, I'm hoping to raise enough funds and ideally to get corporate sponsorship to really help me to get to the start line, because at this stage I'm facing some really big expenses, like we're going to replace the entire rig and various other things, and all the other expenses that are involved for other gear, equipment, provisions, flights, entry fees for the race, running costs. It just goes on and on and on. So of course, I'm not going to get alone single-handedly to the start line. I'm going to need a lot of support, a lot of help, and a lot of luck. So if you would like to follow the journey, please do. We're on Facebook. I've got a really cool media team that's running Facebook and Instagram and posting updates really, really frequently. So please follow along and share if you'd like to. And then if you have any ideas for donations or any corporate sponsorships or anything, I'd be really, really happy to hear them. And that's it from me. And a really, really big thanks for listening to me this evening.